because pain is one of the most powerful drivers of change. So the weekends and, your free times are, almost designed to get you away from that dissatisfaction you feel from work. Stop sort of, killing the pain. Let the pain grow, right? Anything that kills your pain, remove it.
Yeah.
And pain is uncomfortable, right? Nobody likes to sit on a thorn. People very quickly want to get away from it, right? But it's like you have an anesthesia up there, right? And you can't feel the thorn. So the first thing you do is remove that anesthesia. And suddenly you'll start to feel the thorn. And now you are uncomfortable, right? And now you want to change. Then what you do is now you clarify your vision.
I just remember asking people, how's life, man? Chaliरहेछ.
Yeah.
And this is chaliरहेछ, okay? They're doing their work and they're partying in the evening. They're doing their work and they're going out in the weekends. So that is chaliरहेछ, okay?
Right.
And now it makes sense. Everything you said
Why
just
it's
makes
just
sense.
chaliरहेछ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Kritisha.
And I am Aditya.
And we'd like to welcome you all to Dhikichyau The Podcast, episode 21. And since this is a continuation of the What Next series, we have with us today Ravi Mainali.
Hi.
Thanks for being here in our podcast.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so he is a leadership coach, executive coach, and a business coach. He also works as a life coach. He's also a facilitator and a corporate trainer. And he is a certified professional coach from Erickson College Vancouver, Canada, and member of the International Coach Federation, and holds a designation of a PCC, which is Professional Certified Coach. So that's all on Ravi Dai. So he's with us and he's going to guide us on how life coaching works and how we can, reap benefits out of it. Yeah, so welcome to our podcast, Ravi Dai.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would you like to talk a little bit on coaching and what it actually is?
Sure.
Yeah.
So very simply, whatever form of coaching you have, coaching is helping a person get from point A, which is where they are right now, to point B.
Mm-hmm.
Where you want to be.
Yeah, where you want to be. Mm-hmm. Right, so whether you are talking about life coaching or business coaching or whatever, a person will come to a coach and they are at a certain place, that's A, and they need to get to point B. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that B is defined, they know it, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And that's usually where the coaching begins.
Right.
All right, so we first would need to define what that point B is. Mm-hmm. What people would typically feel is that sense of dissatisfaction.
Right.
And they may frame it in whatever language they want. But typically, sometimes it's also not being able to define that point B. So whatever form of coaching is there, a coach typically works with the client to work from point A to point B. That's a very generic definition. Now that B can be maximizing a person's potential. It can be helping them get a very specific goal. So whatever way we define it, all forms of coaching typically would work in that manner.
Right. I think that's you're like the perfect person for us to have on our podcast, especially in this series, because we are talking about fresh graduates who are confused about what they want to do, where they want to go, how they want to carry on with life, and also people, not exactly about graduates matra, but anyone who is stuck with the what next question, what do I do with my life khale question. So I think it's going to be a fruitful conversation today.
I hope so.
For our listeners and for us. Yeah, so I also wanted to know how you started this journey. How did you get to how did you become a life coach?
Right. So, the kind of person I was is, I had this kind of tendency to want to take, whether it's an individual, a team, or an organization, and say, how do you develop it more? How do we sort of, it's sort of, my Strengths Finder assessment tells me that I'm what you would call a developer, right? I'm also somebody that likes to think about the future. And if you sort of merge those two together, coaching is something that works very well. Right? And so the question was, how do you sort of put this into a skill set, into a defined profession, into a work? And it's one thing because thinking about the future or improving things is still very vague.
Right.
Right? You sort of want to be able to bring very specific skill set, tools, techniques and tactics to help people. So coaching is a medium for doing that. And, once that was clear, I think it was a question of building the skill set and the experience.
Right.
And so the certifications form the part of that knowledge base. In fact, the International Coach Federation's certification also includes experience.
Okay.
Experience as in?
As in, you have to have coached X number of people for
Okay.
X number of hours. So part of my certification, I had to have completed at least 500 hours of coaching with clients, and out of that, at least 75% had to be paid.
Oh.
So it
That is before the certification.
Yeah. So what that certification is not only for knowledge and all of that stuff, it's also certifying for experience.
All right.
So when you are getting person with a certain level of, the International Coach Federation, you're already getting people who have built-in experience into that certification. Once that was done, as a part of my certification, I started out, doing some free work because there was still that 25% which was free. And then, when you're starting a new profession, free is good because then there's no pressure on you also. And so you sort of very quickly then transition into paying clients, and then you sort of expand out into. So you can start off with general coaching skills, and then you can sort of decide what kind of a niche you want to see, because there's lots of types of coaching, right?
So, but when was the time, when was that specific point when you realized that, okay, मलाई चाहिँ life coach नै बन्नु छ, or like coaching गर्नु छ भनेर?
It was probably, I was in Thailand almost like 10-12 years ago.
Okay.
The idea of being a coach is pretty old, actually, right? But I think what triggered was, I was on a beach in Pattaya, not in Pattaya, I think it was in Phuket, and I'm thinking like, okay, once I get back, I probably don't want to do work that I don't necessarily enjoy. Or even if I enjoyed it to some extent, I sort of had certain values that I wanted to live. Like, what is my idea of a great work? So I had values like freedom, flexibility, and it's a concept values will bring about when we're talking about what next, because it's a very valuable concept.
Right.
And so when I put all of that together and looked at what is it that would sort of allow me to be flexible with my work time, allow me to design, have that sense of freedom, and then coaching was one thing that was already there. So it was sort of that push to make it, I guess, come to life.
I think for many people, once you talked about like you were in Pattaya and like you knew like what kind of life you want, So let's say I also had this concept about my life ma, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to have like this career, But now listening to you, I feel like first you have to figure out what kind of life do you want, and then you can build around that. Like the kind of careers you choose will be around like what kind of like you said, you wanted some freedom in life, And मलाई चाहिँ talking to many people, doing this podcast itself, also learning a lot of things. So the what next question always hit me after once you're done with bachelor's, then you have your family telling you to do something, then you have your friends, they're doing their own things, then you have your cousins doing their own thing. So you look at a lot of people and they're all like going about life, and it just adds more confusion to you and like, abo ke गर्ने हुन्छ, should I start working, should I go out for further studies, like, Then it was always like, life ma, I want to be a businessman, I want to do this, I want to do that. But now I feel like you said, so I feel like I value freedom very much. So I want a life where I can be free. So if I want to go to Pattaya tomorrow, like I can have that. So I don't want to be bound by me to work or any of those obligations. So how do you go about doing that? After you said like you decided what kind of life you wanted, so how do you go about from there?
So I mean, for some people, sometimes they might not even be clear that this is what they want.
Exactly.
Right. So there is what happens once you're clear, and but I'm not even clear when you say. So you sort of back down a little bit more, and you sort of look at that vision perspective. So there's several ways to go about it. So since you are saying, okay, I'm sort of clear to some extent. Now, the work that I would sort of want to work with you is sort of defining that vision. So what would it look like if you were free? So we could go take a journey down the road.
So you're taking a journey backwards.
You sort of go forward and then you come back and create it. Right? right? So you'd still need to put flesh and the bones and figure out some of the details, because freedom itself can be a very vague term.
Right.
Being flexible is very vague. What does it mean? Like, what would it look like for you? So we try to define the elements of that vision. And then once we have that element defined, we can sort of do that. Now, some people may not be clear. They're like, I'm not really sure. I don't know what I want. Then you can start to look at alternatives. You can look at values, right? So we can do some work. So I would do values. So what are values, right? So values are, there are several ways to define it. They can be sort of guidelines for you. So I want to be honest, Bani. That's one way of looking at it. So it sets what you can and cannot do. That's something that you prioritize and say is important to you.
The values that you believe in.
Yeah. Other way to look at values is we define as the end value and the means value once again, right? So let's say if I ask somebody what do they want, they might say I want to get rich, etc. But what, and there's typically answers you'll get, I want to travel around the world, I want to get rich, and some of this classic stuff that you hear. But if I ask people, so what does traveling around the world give you? Right? It's like what I experience is this sense of exploration. Let's say is that what, and that's a feeling they have inside of them. Right? So the journey around the world is extrinsic to them. It's something that they're going around. But that sense of exploration is something they feel inside of them. So that's ultimately an end value. So that traveling around the world is something that got them to feeling that sense of exploration, right? So we sort of discover what those intrinsic values are for that individual, right? And so let's assume that a person comes up with a list of intrinsic values. And so I would typically work with people to do all kinds of exercises to help them through that. And once they come up with their values, so let's assume it's exploration, it's achievement, it's a sense of security, it's creativity, it's learning, and so on and so forth. They'll come up with those values. And then the idea is, how do they what kind of life or what kind of work, what kind of value they can bring where those values will be lived. So it's not that people are not living those values. They might experience it, but very little. So I might ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how much exploration, that sense that you're living a life that is, exploring things. I mean, how much are you living that? So you might say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's just 2. Not much.
Right now.
Yeah.
Right now.
And so we start to push that idea. If it went to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, what would that life look like? Okay. Right? And so slowly, a vision of the kind of life they want to live will start to pop out.
So are you saying before we set a goal or want to reach point B, we need to internalize and have that self-assessment done?
It's good to do it. Some people are aware, some are not. Here's the danger if you don't do it, right? So let's assume somebody has this creativity as a very intrinsic value for them as part of their life and work. And they join a job, and that job has a lot of data entry in it and all kinds of stuff. So what's going to happen is 3, 4, 5 years down the road, that sense of creativity does not get lived.
Yeah.
Because the job is not allowing that sense of creativity to manifest.
Right.
So this person starts to feel frustrated. So when people start what next, when people graduate, they're very excited to get their first job and start to move along and things are happening. But if the value aligned behind then down the road they'll start to get frustrated with their job. So obviously if you can sort of know what those values are, and if you can align it up front, then the journey forward is not like hitting a roadblock for that person. So it does not become okay, now I'm in a job, I'm trying to be creative, but I can't. So din ka din urda hari, that's how you start having Monday morning blues and all kinds of stuff. Going to work. So it becomes this inner struggle. But if you sort of get that right, then what happens is this person is banging his head on the wall trying to be creative but can't. This other person that sort of gets his value right is now moving from a 2 to a 3 to a 4 to a 5 to a 6 to a 7, and then he's getting deeper and living his value more, and he sort of feels a greater sense of satisfaction and fulfillment as he moves along. It's work, obviously, to do this. It's not straightforward.
Exactly.
That's the reason why most people don't, and they jump into it. But the problem is there, right? So you'd sort of run into unfulfilling work, unfulfilling career. and then you start having other kinds of problems, right?
So what are the mistakes people usually make while they're finding these values within them?
So it's not so much mistakes. What I would say is, I guess, not listening to their voice a little bit more. And then second is not necessarily monetizing it.
Monetizing?
I just want to ask, like, how do you know you want something? Because most of the times when you think you want something, it's because people have told you that if you do that, it's going to make you happy one day. Okay? For like so long, I'm just giving a random example. For so long, if like people tell me, and I see people around, I see like my brother is a swimmer, my sister is a swimmer, and they're both doing well, and they find fulfillment in that. And I would just like want to follow
the
them.
fact that
I want to see like
is,
think like swimming is fun. Maybe I should do it too. Or like, you know, when people tell you should get a job, you should like. I see a lot of this in Gorkha battalion ko, you know, people. So their families are so, because it's not just like a work, it is a lifestyle, as far as I've seen. And so if someone's dad is like from a Gorkha army, like the son grows up wanting to do that, being that. But somewhere down the line, if they figure out, you know, like, is it what I want, or is it just because what, you know, society tells me that's a brave thing to do? Or like, how do you actually define like what is your internal like afno voice ke ho र society le timलाई भन्नको के हो भन्नु के?
Well, it's quite simple. Just test it out. So let's assume that somebody says you should be a swimmer, right? And you're like, okay, maybe, right? Just go start swimming and see how you feel after that. So one of the things as a part of discovery is to eliminate what you don't want as fast as possible. So one of the best ways to get to what you want is to be able to very quickly eliminate what you don't want. So think of like understanding what you want as being like like moving through an onion that has layer after layer, right? So maybe the bulb is that is core you, that is what you enjoy, what you want to do, what is meaningful for you, what gives you fulfillment, what feels like play for you. Right? But then you have all these outer layers that comes from society, that can come from parents, that can come from whatever else, right? How do you sort of get past it is to test it out and move through it as quickly as possible and be open to sort of debriefing and understanding, is this for me or not? So I'll very quickly go through a swimming class, test it out. If it looks like it's what it is for me, test it out as soon as possible, and then see, okay, do I actually enjoy it or not? Not move on to the next, that's gone. That one layer of your onion is now gone. Swimming is gone, right? So what next? So figure out. Now the problem is if people can get stuck in that first thing forever, or the second thing, or the third thing, before they can actually get to the onion. So that is a little bit of a risk, and that is where you would still have to preserve your mind and keep yourself, let's say, pliant, flexible, open, willing to change. Right? And so there is that side of work that needs to be done. Otherwise, you could sort of look at one or two things, you know, and typically people earning income for the first time get used to that and don't want to change. The second the risk is, you know, once you start to move forward. So does that make sense? Yeah,
it does.
Yeah.
So the elimination is your best friend.
So if you can't figure out what you want to do, at least figure out what you don't want to do.
Yeah. So figure out, like, you know, at the top of your mind, what is the first thing that looks reasonable? Right? Jump into it and sort of see if this is for me. So there are two ways. One is you go wide by eliminating. You do a lot of things. Second is to go deep into the same thing.
Okay.
Right? So you can take swimming and, you know, you can go deeper into it and sort of test it out. Second is to go at something, very quickly eliminate it and go into the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Right.
But again, okay, for me, I feel like I've switched a lot of things. You know, I used to swim. I was a competitive level swimmer. I was in a band, and I wanted, like, at that point, that was all I wanted. So then I joined a gym, got into fitness. Then I was into film making and a lot of things. So now I feel like, is it like am I like not capable enough to stick to one plan? Am I like pivoting too much, switching? Is that becoming a habit? Like for me to just like try out new things and just like switch between things, does that, like, you know, become a habit?
Well, I mean, there are several ways to look at it, right? You don't necessarily have to just work with one thing. It's possible that your career could be a combination of 2-3 things.
Okay.
That's also there. I mean, it doesn't just have to be one thing. You could be a podcaster. You could be an author. and you could be third something, whatever is it. Like you could be in a rock band.
Yeah.
Right. So you could possibly take all three of them simultaneously because that's possibly how you enjoy it. Right. Rather than just one thing, what I would say is look at the value you can generate and the problem you can solve. Right? Because people will pay you to the extent of the problem you solve people. So it's not like I have a marketing degree in MBA or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's what exactly is the problem I'm solving for somebody. So when people finish degrees, they have degrees, but the clarity of the problem they solve is not refined. Right? And people pay for problems that are solved.
Yeah.
So when you look at whatever is it you're doing, one is, the reason why we say values and, whether you enjoy it or not, it's a marathon. Careers last 30, 40, 50, 60 years. If you don't enjoy it, it becomes painful, right? And second is you will run into somebody that enjoys that career. And that guy will always be learning new things and he's always very curious and he'll sort of blow you out of the water. Right? So somewhere after the 3, 4, 5, 6 year mark, that starts to show up. Right? And so for you to even be successful at something, it's useful if you enjoy it, if you like it, if you have this curiosity towards it, because you learn new things, you keep getting better at it. I mean, if you take coaching, for example, it's a never ending thing. That PCC certification has a 3-year validity. Within that 3 years, I have to learn X number of credits of new things and, and then it gets updated. Otherwise it expires. Okay. Now think about, I'm like a guy that didn't enjoy it. I did it because my parents told me. Yeah. Like, every time I have to update this would become like a nightmare for me.
Exactly.
Right? So it's the same thing. So if you don't sort of enjoy that, that is your challenge. You will not learn, you will not sort of grow to the extent that somebody that enjoys it. But also I think most importantly for people that are starting out and are looking for career instead of jobs or whatever, my take would be to consider what is the problem you solve, for whom.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Because if you define that very clearly, then you sort of have something that, the exchange of monetary gain or whatever else takes place. A lot of people are doing stuff, and obviously if you are very good, exceptional, then you become the market leader in terms of solving that problem. Right? So instead of getting a job, instead of completing degrees, what is a more practical, useful framework to think is what is the problem I solve and for whom? So if I were to ask most people, what is the problem you solve? They'd be like, I have a marketing degree, right? I have a finance degree, but they have difficulty articulating the problem they solve. And so I think that is the first framework to think through.
Right. I want to go a little back where we talked about, getting stuck. And I mean, you talked about how, you switched from one thing to other. But somehow people sometimes get stuck in one problem. They're thinking about the society, they're thinking about their family and everything.
They get stuck in a job, you mean? Yeah, okay.
Stuck in a job or stuck in one mentality, if you may. So how do we pivot from that situation?
And that's very common, right? First and foremost, I think I have a very counterintuitive solution to that, right? What often happens is people, the longer they go into a job, they sort of become very good at what I would call self-medicating. Everyone does. Right, so medicating.
Oh yeah.
Right, so your weekends are set in such a way that it's a getaway.
Yeah.
And your evenings are such, at 6 p.m. I'm really tired. I got to watch the TV, or I have to, hang out with friends, drink a little, or whatever is it, watch football or whatever. So the weekends and your free times are almost designed to get you away from that dissatisfaction you feel from work.
Right.
Right. So in a sense, what you're doing is you're blunting the pain. Right. That's one thing that I think people should stop doing, because pain is one of the most powerful drivers of change. So by sort of setting your free time, so between 9 p.m. and 6 p.m. everyone is
mostly free.
Occupied. 9 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Right. What you're free is like the 6 p.m. to, let's say, 8 a.m. Right, assuming it takes you 1 hour to get to work, all of that stuff, right? That is when the change happens, not between like 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. But unfortunately, since most people medicate themselves and blunt their pain, the drive to change is sort of half dead.
Yeah,
it's half dead. Typically the way people change is either they have a clarity of vision of what they want to do. Okay, this is what I want to do, and that pulls them, right? Or there's a pain that's very strong. That's like, this is horrible. I need to get away from this situation. I need to get away from this job. I don't like this. I don't like this environment. But because that pain is now blunted, that force of change is now muted. So what I would say is stop sort of, killing the pain. Let the pain grow.
So work overtime.
No. No, so whatever is it that is sort of like, not work overtime. So let's assume that if you, somebody likes to drink alcohol with friends, maybe reduce that. If they like to watch a lot of TV, reduce that. What that does your senses become more alive to the dissatisfaction you feel at work.
Exactly.
Right? And then now you use that dissatisfaction to create change.
Yeah.
Right? Because then it makes you hungry, it makes you uncomfortable. So then you become more conscious going to work that this is very uncomfortable for me. Otherwise, you're sort of half dead going into work.
Yeah.
Right? And you sort of kill your pain. So first and foremost is do not kill your pain. Let it grow. Right? Anything that kills your pain,
bad.
Remove it.
Yeah.
Right? So now you become this person that is very driven by pain, and pain is uncomfortable, right? Nobody likes to sit on a thorn. People very quickly want to get away from it. Right? But it's like you have an anesthesia up there, right? And you can't feel the thorn. So the first thing you do is remove that anesthesia. And suddenly you'll start to feel the thorn. And now you are uncomfortable. Right? And now you want to change. Now then what you do is now you clarify your vision. Right? So what do I want to do? Right? Okay, so now this is the second part. Often people don't do this work. Right? So the dissatisfied, people talk about it at their lunch break.
Yeah.
But they will not sort of take that next step to build that vision. Because you can't just quit your job, right? Technically, it doesn't make sense. I know somebody who does. But for a lot of people, the moment is dissatisfied, boom, just quit, done. I don't care, like if I'm not getting my next meal, I'm just done, I'm leaving it, right? So there are very few people, but usually for people, they might need to, have some level of income coming in. Because they could be paying for their groceries, they could be, paying rent, or they have to pay like a mortgage, or, an EMI that's due or whatever, or there's a newborn baby and so on and so forth. So determine what is it that you want to do. The pain sort of makes it clear, this is not what I want to do. All right? And then you define that vision, whether it's through the vision or whether it's values or whatever is it, you sort of build that clarity. And then ultimately what needs to be done is you determine what is the one smallest action step I can take today and this week. Because it's not enough to build a long-term vision. That's only useful if you know how that ties into the action you're taking today. So once you have that first step, once you have that first step, then you start taking it.
So what can be an example of that step?
So an example can be, let's assume that somebody is, I don't know if you want to bring a real life example from your life, or somewhere else I can do it, or I can just take a random example. So let's assume that somebody is working in a multinational company, and let's say they don't like the nature of the industry. And let's say they want to change to a different industry. Let's say it's fast moving consumer good industry, and let's say they want to move into either the financial sector or something like that, right? It's a different skill set. So one of the first things they need to do is, once the vision is clear, and that job would be great for me, is to assess their skill gap.
For the next job, for the next career.
So the skill gap, the competency gap, the knowledge gap, the capability gap, it could be a networking gap, right? Very important. So whatever is my gap, and what is the one thing I need to take? So let's assume if it's a networking gap, who are the people I need to know? And who is the one person I need to start building a relationship with? And what can I do today? Maybe it could be a LinkedIn invite. And then it could just be like, can I just get together over a cup of coffee and see how this industry works?
Right.
So that is the one smallest step, right? The person is still maintaining his daytime job, right? That gap can be huge. And then there could be a knowledge gap. Maybe it comes through a certificate. Maybe it comes through a course. Then you saying, okay, I'm going to register for this course.
Right.
But to do that, you sort of have to, keep that vision alive and feel the pain.
Yeah.
Right? Because what you're dealing with is, after working through a whole day, people are probably going to feel tired. Yeah. So the natural tendency is to escape into something that's relaxing, right? But if you sort of keep those two alive, then it's about just deciding like what is the next step and the next step and the next step. And over a period of like, let's say 52 weeks, you have like at least 52 solid action steps that gets you pretty close.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When you talked about all of this, like, I just like remember asking people, all my friends, okay, how's life, man?
Yeah.
And this is okay? They're doing their work and they're partying in the evening. They're doing their work and they're going out in the weekends. So that is okay?
Right.
And now it makes sense. Everything you said
Why
just
it's
makes
just
sense.
Yeah. So. And in a sense, the idea is to now become more alive to what is happening, alive to your pain, alive to your possibilities.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about keeping the pain alive and, having that straight focus on where you want to go next. But how do you do that? How do you stick to the plan? Now you've decided, okay, मलाई यो इन्डस्ट्रीमा काम गर्नु छैन. This is not what I want to do. I want to jump to something else. But you're still so habituated to working in the same environment, in that same routine. So how do you stick to that decision?
Right. So once you have that, so it comes to the question of habits, right? You're still sticking with habits. And the best way, whatever you read about habits, the best way I've seen that works in my life to break habits is to hijack the mind, right? Because your mind is sort of, you have a pattern set. Right? You get up, you react every day, you move about the same way, people drive to work in the same, sort of almost the same road every day.
Right.
And so that habit is very strong. The longer it goes away from you from like every decade, it becomes stronger and stronger. And that's why you have something like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? Because over a period of time, but the quickest way to do that is to hijack the mind. And by hijacking the mind, and I'll tell you how you can do it, is you disrupt your habit patterns. Forget about the old habit, right? It's there. Let it be there. You don't touch it. But by hijacking it, you sort of set a new path, right? Now we know about neuroplasticity. We know that we can sort of change the mind. We know that we can create new neural pathways, right? That means if you set a new habit in your brain, literally a new pathway is set. Your old habit has a pathway that is set, right? And so what happens is unconsciously that pathway keeps getting stronger and stronger. And very quickly, just a thought triggers that path and you are acting, right? So you let that be. Don't touch it. Don't try to change that habit. Try to replace it with a new habit. So very simply, let's assume you don't exercise at all. And as a part of all of this, you decide, okay, I'm going to be the person that exercises. Very quick tools to do that is using self-talk and visualizing. Right. And so typically, let's say if you're a person that doesn't exercise or if you're a person that's going to a job, you have these part of the way our brain functions is we have thoughts in words and then we have images. Right. So continuously, those are, going around in our head. Now what we need is, let's assume that I want a different career. I want to start exercising or whatever is the change you want. You now start to build a language that allows that to happen. So you ignore that you're not exercising for a while. Now you sort of define that you want to exercise. So has anyone exercised here and found it difficult? Or going to exercise 6 o'clock in the morning or something like that, right? What happens, think about it, it's like winter, it's very cold, you want to go exercise. What's the first thought that would pop up?
You just hit the snooze button off.
Yeah, what is that? That's a thought you had, and that's an image. You suddenly imagine, the cold outside, or or you just feel that it's so warm here. I just want to be warm here. So there's these thoughts, beliefs. Now, what if you, before you go to bed, have a script that says, I enjoy exercising. I love to get up in the morning. And then you sort of have this image of you going to the gym in the morning, getting up, coming back, feeling energized. You sort of blocked your mind with only that. So you sort of hijacked it. You sort of prevented a previous pattern from entering in the first place. And if you do that long enough, you can psych yourself to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go jogging in the snowstorm like I've done once just to test this idea.
Yeah, you did.
Right, yeah. So the whole idea was you just sort of, how much can you hijack the mind, right? Can you get
how was that experience like?
No, it was great. I did it for a long time.
You did?
Yeah.
For how
people
long?
used to tell me, aren't you going to get sick or something? No, I sort of wanted to test this idea. So I think there was a period where for 3 years, I almost went to gym 4-5 days every week without missing, like early in the morning, right? So the whole idea is you have habits, that's there. And the research we know about habits is that typically it takes 21 to 240 days for a habit to be set. So that means like 3 weeks to 8 months. And you do hear this 3 weeks figure thrown out a lot. It takes 3 weeks, but typically that's the beginning. And the 3 weeks actually comes from this guy called Maxwell Maltz. So I think in the 1960s, 70s, he was a plastic surgeon. And he had this, and he was sort of changing people, their faces, and people would be very dissatisfied with themselves. And they thought, if I got this job done, I got that job done, I'd be very happy. And so there's this particular lady who had a nose job done. And, sooner or later, her dissatisfaction was still there. And so this guy got a little curious. What is going on? And he wrote this books called Psycho-Cybernetics. And so what he was saying was it takes typically 3 weeks for people to start changing their behaviors, habits, etc. And I don't know, somehow somebody picked it up and 3 weeks became like a standard thing. But typically it can take 3 weeks is like a starting point. It can take almost 8 months. And even after that, you can drop out of a habit. You can do it for 3 years and you can still drop out. You can do it for 5 years and you can drop out. Right? So that potential is always there. So the idea would be to very quickly hijack the mind. So if you want a particular career, if you want a particular business, whatever you want, learn how to direct the inner dialogue and the images to fit that goal, fit that vision.
So identify as a fit person.
Yeah, but very specifically, you create scripts, you can record it, you can listen to it, you have a dialogue running in your head. So the moment you're free, guess what? That old habit pattern will start to take over. Right? And this is why typically people don't achieve New Year goals. It's very popular. People, I want to do whatever, right? After 3-4 weeks, guess what? They never actually did anything to change the mind. So the habit pattern, their beliefs, their images are intact. And trying to change just on the extrinsic level, just like going to the gym can be like painful. If you do it, that's good. In fact, for executing, that's the first thing you do. Don't wait to do anything. See if you can execute right now. And then if it's very difficult, then you work your way backward, right?
All right.
I think Anthony, we read this book. We did a whole episode on habits. So I read the book called The Atomic Habits, and you read
The Power of Habits.
Yeah. So James Clear and Charles Duhigg, right?
Yes. Yeah. And this one say it always talked about how you should start within, so internalize, so identify yourself as a fit person. Then who goes to the gym? Not I will go to the gym and be a fit person, but I am a fit person, so I will go to the gym. So I think that is what you're talking about, hijacking your mind and the dialogue that you play inside your head.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you get a hold of that, your thoughts and beliefs are very, very strong. So if you are setting a vision or a goal for a career, if your beliefs are not aligned with that vision, and if your thoughts, your images are not aligned, then you basically have a virus inside your system. You have something that's continuously fighting against that goal. Because you have a belief that runs opposite to it. You want to be healthy, but I just really enjoy sitting on my couch and just doing nothing. Right? So if that's a deep-seated belief you have, then sooner or later that vision that you're casting out for your career or health or whatever is running against an internal enemy. And so you want to create that alignment in terms of the vision, your beliefs, and your actions.
I think this is the first thing that you said when we started. First you identify the people's unarko values, ke cha bhanera. I think this is where goal setting begins as well. Right. So habits, and so I think coming back to hazule bhaneko kura and अहिले aligns perfectly.
Yeah.
About knowing your values first, then figuring out what you want to do.
Right.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. So we talked about how we switch from one place to another. But there's also this confusion as to should I need to pivot or should I need to persist at the same thing you're doing. So where do we exactly draw the line between?
I'll just add, because a lot of things when you start, you don't see a lot of results in the beginning. We're talking about gym, so we'll just take that as an example. So the first week you go, you're not going to see any changes. The second week you're not going to see any changes. It's going to take a lot of persisting and going to the gym for a couple of months to actually see a difference in your strength, your health, your mobility and everything. So I think त्यही persist गर्ने कि this is not for me भनेर छोड्ने pivot. Because सुरुमा we talked about just try out a lot of things, and if you don't like it, then like just go back. But if you like, what if you actually do it for a long while and then you get like this is like more than what I thought it was भनेर. So
yeah, I mean it's sort of whether you persist or leave depends on whether it's aligned with your vision and your values, right? So if you do not do that work, then you're not sure what the long term holds for you. But if you've sort of done that work, then it's not so much immediate result. You sort of know, okay, I'm going in this general direction. Right. Slow or fast. Slow or fast is a differing thing. But okay, if it looks like generally, okay, this represents the values I want. If I were to achieve this vision, the kind of person I become is what I would, I'd like to be the kind of person that is living this kind of a life.
Right.
And, these match my values over it. Then, generally I would say persist. Irrespective of what short-term results you get. Right? If, however, whatever you're doing is not aligned with your long-term, then, obviously it's get out as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Learn the lesson, get out.
Right.
So it's so much whether it's aligned with the long-term or not. Does it match your values? Is this the inner experience you want? Is this the kind of life you want? Is this the kind of work you want? Does this give you that sense of accomplishment, achievement, whatever your value is? Will you like the person you will become as a result of, achieving these goals? Then yes. But having said that, you do also want to have some very quick, small wins in place.
So that you get motivated along the line.
Because 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is all out there. You can sort of very quickly break it down into, for this week and this month, what would mark a sense of progress for me? So even though the end result achieved no bhaini, you have these markers or milestones of progress is what you need to set out. And establish quick wins. Quick wins, then you get sort of demotivated.
Right.
It's very out there, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever. And if you're a team, even more so. Right? Because then you have to motivate other people also. But if people feel that things are happening and moving in the right direction, then that keeps you on track.
Right.
Makes sense.
So everything, most of it comes down to goals, eh? If you have your goals straight, if you have your goals well figured out, then it's not very difficult to make decisions.
Yeah, I'm from a decision perspective, it's not easy, right? But there's no guarantee you'll execute. So just because you know your vision doesn't mean you're actually moving forward towards it. Because you might actually have habits in place that are not,
aligned with your...
That are not aligned. So you over a period of time, you just build like poor habits. Right? So now I want to do this. But on a day-to-day basis, you just have tougher time executing on it.
Right.
So, okay, there was this time when I was ekdamai into self-help books. So I should read anything and everything I got my hand on. And the more I read it, the more I felt like I was doing something. I was learning something. I was like being more motivated. Then it came to a point where I figured out it just gave me a false sense of accomplishment, like I was doing something, but all I was doing was just reading stuff and not implementing at all.
Right.
And it just gave me, but it made me feel good because I like accomplished it. And like every time I finished a book, it made me feel like I was doing great in life. And like that kind of was like a toxic, positivity kind of, would make you feel good. But you actually wasn't like doing much of a help.
Yeah, I mean, you can test it.
Yeah.
So what I would recommend is next time you are using any of these self-help kind of stuff is to see what is the change that has happened in my life. So very quickly you can weed out which is a useful idea and which is not. Right? So let's assume that somebody tells you like, okay, you can exercise, you can do this, a lot of potential, blah, blah, blah. Right? Can I actually do it? Can I actually get to the gym every day? Right? Can I actually learn a new skill? So the idea, the test is, if you're improving in this, is can you sort of implement it, and can you sort of bring an idea to sort of life? If you want to improve your grades, can you actually do it? If you've been like a student that has gotten 75-80% all your life, can you become a person that gets 90%? Right? If you're a person that does not go to the gym, can you get that? If you're a person that has really difficulty being disciplined and completing a course, can you do that? If you're a person that has a difficulty socializing with people and expanding your network, can you actually do that?
Through the help of that book.
Yeah. So or whatever is So those are some markers of progress. So if you're not seeing it, then what you're seeing is potential. but not actual benefit.
Yeah.
Right. So if you go back to a basic equation that we use in coaching, which is, performance is equal to potential minus interference. Right. So, performance, what actually will happen, it's based on, your potential could be 10. But if, the interference you have in your head, this is a lot of internal, is like 8, 9, then, performance is 1 or 0.
Right.
Right. So if you have like counterintuitive thoughts, so you're really excited, you read a book, you want to do something, you see potential, it's there, you're there right up there, but you have all these poor habits, poor thoughts, poor beliefs, all of them in place, and they are also very high, then, performance is nothing or very low. So what we want to do is we sort of want to minimize that interference, keep the potential high and actually execute and get results. Because if you cannot walk away with something tangible, then it's sort of good as an idea, but you don't benefit from it, right?
Makes sense. So, since we are focusing on the what next question, and this entire series is revolving around that, what would be your suggestion to people who are struggling with that question? What next?
Yeah, I would say just try to clarify what is it you want. Instead of necessarily just jumping into the first job. If it's there, jump right in but be open to do the work between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. to sort of evaluate.
Right.
Is this what I want, right? Because you sort of, too much free time, there's a good chance if people are not disciplined, they just build poor habits. Right? You do build some useful network by even getting a job you don't like initially, right? And then I would say, keeping your mind very open to the possibility of what is it that I actually do want? What are my values? What would a good life look like for me? And it's a catch-22 situation for somebody that has not worked as much. They have a hard time articulating that. So once they get 1 or 2, sort of a job experience under the belt, they get a better sense of, I don't like to work with this kind of a setting. I don't want to be, I don't want to have a line manager that's micromanaging me all the time. Those kind of experiences can be useful to build along the way. And that sort of sets you up to maybe through the process of elimination, getting very quickly to where you want. So very quickly, I would say just try and define that vision. But more importantly, I would say also, see to what extent you control your mind. Can you actually lead it in a particular direction or not? If you can't, then do some work around that. Again, in your free time.
Like
while you're making money, right?
Like waking up at 4 a.m. and running in the thunderstorm.
Well, if that's what you want, right? That was just a test, but I don't do that. But the idea is to see to what extent can you sort of manipulate your mind. Because the mind, as they say, is a good slave but a horrible master, right? Yep. So to what extent can you sort of get it to do what you want? Again, work with, clarifying that vision, try to build that understanding of what kind of industry is useful for you, what kind of values do you want to manifest. Don't be afraid of change. Keep the pain alive. Keep building that vision, right? And eventually it's, learning to minimize interference. Even very successful people, for them to get to the next level, they also have to keep working on their interference, right? Because their success brings them up to a level. But for them to get to the next level, it's the same process.
Definitely.
Right? Because they are sort of hitting your, your potential and your sort of your cap in terms of what you're doing. So that's a never-ending process in itself, yeah.
But when you say like manipulate your mind or, control your mind, so what kind of exercises can people do?
I would say self-talk is the easiest. There are some skills around it. So you can design your self-talk scripts around, I would say just choose one around the most important goal in your life. Whether it's career, you design one for yourself. And, you can just do some basic Googling around how to use self-talk and visualizing and sort of build a discipline around it.
Exactly.
What I would say is see if you can record it. Because what happens is at the end of the day, I do believe that until you've built momentum, you need one tool that works for you when you don't have the energy to work.
As in?
So what I mean is, let's assume at the end of the day, you're really tired. And let's say you want to go to the gym.
Or
it's your goal.
Okay.
It's part of your goal. Or let's say you want to change your career and, you need to take that course. or you need to do something in the evening. But guess what? You're already tired.
Right.
And the natural impulse is to do something that's easy, that's refreshing, that's whatever, right? But what if you had a self-talk that just played in the background, or your cell phone that just had scripts like, I enjoy exercising. So in that 15-20 minutes, it sort of resets you to go and do what you want. Even when you don't have the energy, it does the work for you.
It's just you talking, so...
Yeah, I mean, so typically the way self-talk scripts work is you create 10 to 15 sentences around issues you want to work.
Okay.
So let's assume it's a career you want to build. So you'll have 10, 15 sentences around being, a successful career. Let's say you want to be a great podcaster. You can build around that. Let's assume you want to be a good doctor, or let's assume you want to be a good microbiologist. So you can create scripts around that, 10, 15 of those, or whatever it is. I would say choose one goal. Whether it's exercising or whatever is it.
Right.
And then you record it. You create about 10, 15 sentences that assume you've already achieved what you want to achieve. It's in the present. It assumes you've done it. Not that, you would like to, and so on and so forth. Right? I am a good microbiologist. And you sort of look at what are the elements of a good microbiologist, and you create that into a script.
Okay.
And you sort of then record it. Right? And then once you record it, you sort of listen to it. And then that's a recorded, and then you have what you call a situational script as you're walking, as you're just sitting around, we're walking in the, walking to your car, or sitting in the parking lot, or in traffic. You run that script very quickly based on what is happening. So in a sense, you keep your mind hijacked. Because if you leave that empty space, usually the counter beliefs start taking over.
So you're still in control.
Yeah, so you're still in control. And then you have images to run it. So what would, if you have clarity of your vision, very quickly in the morning or evening, you can sort of have that image. So your mind is occupied with those thoughts. So think of it like why multinational companies would keep advertising even though you know their name.
Yeah.
It's top of the mind advertising.
Yeah.
They want their brands to be top of the mind so that when you walk into a store, you're thinking of their brand and you'll pick it up. Right. So what you are trying to accomplish also has to be top of your mind, because the amount of interference that's there is massive. I mean, you have this phone, you have like all kinds of things buzzing, you have the television, you have your friends. We're living in an age where people's attention span is reducing and reducing. I think they did a study once where they put, like an attention span monitor on top of people's desktop, and it was like, I think 10 seconds that people started looking elsewhere. I mean, that's how it has reduced. So we are sort of bombarded with things that pull our attention. If you cannot stay focused on what you're trying to accomplish and keep your mind hijacked to that level,
exactly,
then you're just going to get scattered in the wind. Right? I mean, that's the reality. So the way to use scripts and images is to keep focused on where you are. So you'll find it quite easy over a period of time. Initially, it's a skill. It's like learning a new language. But then once you start to get a hang of it, and then you can change it to other goals. Once you sort of had a good grasp of one goal and you understand how to use it, and then you shift to a next goal. But you sort of never stop it. It's just the goal alters. And then, so that way you sort of stick to, whatever is it that you have as a goal. Otherwise, if you are the kind of person that is blessed with good upbringing, or, luckily you are that person that is very disciplined, somehow by fluke of nature, then it works. But the way I look at it is, if you had to start a complete new habit from scratch, how would you go about it? Right? So then, these things will, and this is what keeps the mind pliant, flexible, open. You can very quickly learn new skills. You have what's called a growth mindset, right? You don't get sort of stuck and become very rigid. And so that allows you to stick to goals, change where necessary, and then, achieve goals or pivot if necessary.
Right. So, tapale kura garda gardai just like came into my mind about how effective multitasking is. I mean, multitasking bhanda pani, if you have like 2 or 3 goals, can you take them simultaneously? Because I think you repeatedly said, like, take one goal and then move to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a question of how you're talking about multitasking, whether, on a particular level you finish one task and then move to the second, or you disrupt it in the middle and move to the second, right? What we do know is if you disrupt it in the middle and move, your efficiency almost drops by 30-40%.
All right.
Right? Because then you have to come back and start thinking, what was I doing? and sort of get into the rhythm. But if you can sort of finish one task like up to, this is what I'm planning to in this next hour, and then if you move, then that kind of multitasking is different from disrupting it in the middle.
Okay.
So
like
I would personally say try not to disrupt a task until it's completed to a point, because it'll just take you longer to complete it.
Right.
I think, but what she's trying to say
In
is
terms
like
of goals.
in terms of goals and careers. So if you are working in a bank right now, but there's like another thing you want to do, can you take two things simultaneously?
Well, I mean, in terms of, are we talking about trying to quit that career and move ahead?
Not necessarily, maybe trying out something new or like
I
feeding
mean,
that
people
interest.
do it all the time. I mean, I was doing multiple jobs at the same time while transitioning. It's sort of a question of where you are. So let's say if you're financially very comfortable, you can just quit a job and do something full on, right? If you need the money from the first job, and then what you'd have to do is you'd have to determine at what point I'm going to quit this job. So maybe from the next job, either I get like, at least when I get 40%, 50% of my current job, then I'll quit. Then you can sort of build that up to a certain point. Or, there's also the concept of a 10% entrepreneur, right? Where you have a job and then you're also being an entrepreneur on the side. So all of those are possible. You would have to see what is right for you, what your financial condition is, what sort of aptitude and what sort of interest you have, and by when you want the change.
Yeah, the time factor.
Yeah. I mean,
how do you optimally utilize your time?
And also by how long do you want to make a change? So let's assume you are doing 2 jobs and you plan to quit one. How much time are you willing to give yourself? Right? Is it a monetary decision? Is it a skill decision? What is it for you, right?
Now, again, like one thing like struck me is like all in or nothing.
Yeah.
So what about that? Like you want to like euda kura chahi you want to have it like bad enough and like good like put everything in it, but now we're talking about like minimizing the risk and like just like doing this on the side, doing that on the side, taking things simultaneously. So which way is the?
It's actually both. It depends on like what you're comfortable with. Obviously, if it's all in or nothing, when you're fully focused, you have the time, you have the energy. And you can sort of dedicate a lot more time. But let's assume oftentimes what happens is when people make transition from one job to the other, they use the income from the first job to finance their transition to the second job. So if you actually need that money, then it can be actually useful to hedge your bets here. So let's assume your job B requires you to get a certain skill. Right? And that skill requires you to pay $4,000. And guess who's going to pay it? Your first job. Right? So your first job pays for your second sort of job until your skill is good enough to the level that it earns you money.
Right.
So that's also like a one way to do it. Now, it's very situational. It depends on what your particular situation is and what kind of skill sets need to be developed to bridge that gap. Where is the funding? Where is the energy? Where is the time going to come from? If it's impossible, for me, I quit my job when I came to a point where I could not add one more client because I had no time. All right? I had sort of saturated what was possible with my free time. And there were years when I did not watch television. Just to sort of, utilize that 9 to 6 p.m., right? Properly.
Okay.
9 p.m., 6 p.m. to 9 a.m., right? So it's sort of a personal choice. In terms of how do you want to balance it. I also have a friend who, the moment he's dissatisfied, he'll just quit the job even if he doesn't know where his next meal is going to come from. Right? So again, it's your personal tolerance level. How much discomfort can you tolerate? Right? And where is the resource going to come from to facilitate that transition into a new role?
So you can't just blindly go into things. You have to like analyze what resources do you have, how much amount of time, energy you can put into it.
Yeah, money, very important.
Money, exactly.
Right?
Passion is not the only thing.
People can just say like, I love photography, but a good camera is pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, where's the money going to come from?
Right.
Most people will just tell you, just start. But you need to like assist all of these things before you start.
Yeah, and absolutely. You sort of have to bridge that gap between skills, resources, capability, knowledge, networks. Some jobs require to be very well networked. Do you have those networks in place or not? Maybe do you need to build that up to a point before you transition? So you need to sort of consider that and look at where you are and then sort of decide what is the timeline by which you will do it?
Right.
So what I would recommend is to sort of define that timeline. Don't keep it very open-ended. Once your vision is clear, then sort of, and your values are clear, then put a timeline. Otherwise, then, Murphy's law kicks in. Whatever can be done the next day or whatever will probably get done the next day, right? So to make sure that it does not go longer than what is necessary, timeline, and this is where also with goals, we sort of want to make it time-bound.
Right.
Very specific, measurable. All of those components have to kick in for it to actually be a valid goal. And also, then we would know whether it's just those things or are there other things preventing execution. Let's assume all of those are in place and the person still doesn't get it done. Then, as a coach, I'm very curious, why not? Right? Is it like perceptual blocks that are preventing things from happening?
What do you mean when you say perceptual blocks?
So perceptual blocks can be, sometimes people have distorted beliefs that makes it difficult to sort of move forward. So the beliefs are counter to what is required for you to get a goal. So let's assume that if somebody, let's say, wants to have a very, if financial independence is a goal for them, right? But deep down, they hold the belief that rich people are evil, right? Or you cannot be spiritual and rich at the same time. And the person wants to be spiritual also, right? So now suddenly, that belief will make it, will keep popping up as the person tries to build wealth. So we now need to address, that's the elephant in the room that we would need to address. Right?
How do you do that? Because I have a problem with that all the time. Sometimes I have this huge belief that I want to have the most lavish lifestyle ever, and sometimes I just want to live in a hill. That is when two lifestyle, I understand it, I've seen it, I want to do that as well. But then I understand the people who just want to get away from society and build a self-sustainable life. And both sound attractive.
So you can sort of create your own unique vision that incorporates both. So one way is to think of this as, so this is called an either or belief. It's a distorted belief where you can only have this or that.
Mutually exclusive.
Right? As opposed to where you can have both. So what would a life look like where you are having both?
A lavish mansion on top of a hill.
I mean, think about this. So you sort of need to define it, right?
Yeah.
What would it need like to both? And other ways also to find role models that actually have done both.
Yeah.
Is to look at, examples of people who've done both.
Yeah.
And obviously the third thing is to actually test whether that, mansion on the hill is an actual goal or not.
Yeah.
Because it could be one of those things that you hear from people, right? But deep down, it might not be that fascinating, right? So one of the ways is, when you build a castle in the sky, that's perfect. But you do have to do the work of building the foundation to reach the earth, right?
I think most people goals is kind of similar. They all want a freeing life. They want to be happy. They want to have a wealthy life. But getting there, they don't want to put in the work.
Yeah.
That's where they're okay with Toli Rasa.
Right. Or sometimes people don't know how to go about changing the beliefs and their work ethics also. Because we are creatures of habits.
Yeah.
And once habits are set, conceptually people want it. But they don't know how to go about changing it. So it can be like learning a new skill or a new language about how to actually pursue beliefs, change old habit patterns, change your thinking patterns, get out of that very rigid sort of belief and habit mode, and then actually make yourself flexible enough to adopt new habits. Right? So that itself is a skill. Otherwise, pain is always there. Yeah. So, if people are not willing to change, sometimes they go to the doctor or wherever, bad news, and people change very quickly. If they get a good enough jolt from the pain side, right?
Yeah.
But ideally, what you want is, instead of waiting for that, to be able to make that change on your own.
Exactly. Sounds difficult, changing beliefs.
I found that with self-talk, if you do it well, it's pretty easy. It's one of the easiest things, yeah.
So one of the tools we talked about is self-talk every, dialogues.
Yeah, I would say just record it. It does half the work for you.
Affirmations or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's pretty easy. It's very hard if you do not have good tools or if you do not know how to. But if you do know, it's pretty simple. And if you're willing to put in the work, obviously that's a given, right?
Right.
You do have to put in the work, but there is an assured result at the end of it, right? So I've tested self-talk with improving grades, saving money, changing jobs, relationships, networks. I mean, all kinds of stuff. It's pretty simple. You can just pivot, set a goal, boom, do it, right? Because your mind is now in tune with achieving that, right? It is work. You record it, that's half of it. Other is you do have to sort of build that discipline of using that self-talk continuously. But compared to, let's say, getting the reward, it's very little work. Or compared to living with an undesirable life, again, that's very little work.
Yeah. But like, how long does it take?
So typically, let's say
average.
Yeah. So typically, let's say whatever is it for a behavior, whether it's for a career, you want to change a pattern, you want to learn a new skill, you want to change. Let's say go to the gym, exercise, whatever, or finances. Become a confident speaker, whatever is it that you want to do. Once you start, you'll start to see the benefits in a few weeks. You can start acting immediately, but for it to start to become natural, you'll start to see the benefits in a few weeks. And then assuming that this is something you use all your life, but just the goal changes and the script changes, it's something you keep using forever. Right? Because even if you achieve one goal, guess what? There's a next goal. It's like, one peak is done, there's the next peak to be climbed. So you would sort of keep pivoting in terms of keeping your mind tuned to the next goal. But it's very doable. I mean, pretty straightforward. I've been doing it for years. And a lot of people have been doing it for years. Typically, the kind of people that do it are people who have a lot at stake. It would be the monks, the elite military units, professional athletes. These are the kind of people that use this self-talk, visualization and all, because the stakes for them are very high. Consider a monk that, quits everything and goes and lives somewhere. I mean, he's sort of given up a lot. So he sort of has to get something out of that experience, right? An elite military unit. I mean, if this guy goofs up, I mean, he's killed. Very high at stake. A professional athlete, if he has a bad day, the whole world sees it. It's live on public television. Right? So for most people, when they go to work, they're not in a high stakes situation. So very comfortable. Even if I have a bad day, it doesn't matter. So I mean, if you sort of are willing to play at a higher stakes level, you sort of need the tools also that go with it, right? So if you're willing to sort of change your sort of life, your career, your direction, and instead of very incremental growth, if you're willing to have more exponential growth, so incremental, 2, 3, 5% every year, if you stay long enough, you'll start to, even that starts to look real. But if you want exponential growth, then the mental tools also has to be in line with making you comfortable with the exponential growth. Because if you grow too fast, it'll scare you without those tools. Right. So let's assume somebody that joins their career suddenly, is asked to be the CEO. It's like, no, I don't want to be there, right? I mean, people are not comfortable with success because often the skills, the mindset, the beliefs, etc., are not in place, right? But you can acquire beliefs very quickly to match wherever you want to go. And that's the fastest thing. And once you your beliefs are your leading indicators. So once your beliefs are in place, then it sort of pulls your behavior and everything else slowly with you. Right? And then everything else becomes your lagging indicator, your actually actions, etc. Right? This is assuming that if you try to execute and you find it very difficult. If you find it easy, then you keep executing. Right? But let's assume that you decide that, okay, I want to start my career, I need networking. I need to know people because that's important, right? But suddenly, the first effort at networking, oh my God, this is like horrible. Like I never want to do it again. What was I thinking? One day, you sort of withdraw back into your shell. Then next time, guess what? Are you going to execute or not?
No.
Very little possibility. Yeah. So now what you need is to sort of bring your mind back to the place where it can execute. And so this is where you would actually create a script and use self-talk around being comfortable with networking, with relations, with people, having good social skills. And with that belief in place, you can handle any setbacks quite easily. And then you continue to execute. Okay? So often the gap to executing one of them, assuming there are a whole lot of other gaps also is the mind is not in the place to execute. Conceptually you want to execute, but the mind is very uncomfortable executing that.
So like you talked about how maybe wanted to build relation or anything, and that fails. And that sort of like holds you back from trying it again. So how do you model your, self-talk in a way that doesn't discourage you even when you hit the wall?
So the way, it depends on what is the script you have. So you have these 10, 15 sentences. It assumes that you can keep going on. Okay?
You're already there.
Yeah, you're sort of already there. So even though you get a rejection, it doesn't affect you very much. Okay? Because now your thoughts and beliefs are just in a different place. It's there. You take that rejection in stride, and the kind of person you become is somebody for whom that is part of the game.
Okay. So do you sort of like include that in the script or something?
Yeah, I mean you can. You can sort of incorporate it, or you can sort of frame it in a way that incorporates it in whatever way you want. Right? It's just that you're a person that for whom rejection. You can sort of frame it to say rejections are part of learning to expand. Right. You can sort of have something like that phrased into the sentences, right? So then that becomes a part of it. You sort of expect that this could happen, but it doesn't phase you. As opposed to if you don't have that in place, then a rejection could crush you, right? And typically people for whom like a rejection crushes them, or they feel very awkward, they're unlikely to try.
Yeah.
Again, right? Because it's not like even if you have one great interaction, that's not going to build you a powerful network.
Yeah.
You need to have a lot of successful interactions over a period of time. To get there, I mean, some people not being interested, etc. is part of it. It's a little bit like selling. I don't know if you've done enough sales, but if you do enough sales, if you don't get good at handling rejections, you'll quit very quickly, right? But inbuilt into selling is the fact you'll get rejected. Not everyone can be interested in you or your product or whatever is it.
Right. Talking to you is like made both of us realize how important coaching is. Okay? Right. The real importance of coaching. So would you like to? Would you want to touch upon where we can get connected to you or any coach?
Right. So I mean, generally, you can just connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that's generally for people, that's the quickest way and the professional sort of way. I think my address is right there, right? My LinkedIn handle. But generally, I think the way people would go around getting coaches can be like, coach websites, like, the International Coach Federation would have like list of websites. Other, there are sort of other websites that have professional coaches listed. Coaching is very new in Nepal. Yeah. So very few like, purely certified coaches. Or you can always ask from your networks, who is a coach, how can they sort of help you, who do they know, who have they worked with, or even general Google searches can, just lead you to coaches, right? Yeah. So generally, I mean, working with coach, a lot of coaching generally works in like a duration of 6 months to 2 years. Okay. Minimum 6 months, partly because it can sometimes, if a person does not even know their end goals, vision, some just crafting that, getting to the execution level can take a little time. So, and coaches meet 2-3 times a month, right? And so, just with that duration, that 5-6 months is usually like a minimum time that, but it sort of depends on what your scope of agreement is. So, even with life coaching, like what do you want to work on? I mean, is it just one element, or do you want to progressively cover other elements of life? Right. So first few months, if you work on one area, then you can sort of move on to the next area. So the longer it goes, typically the scope can keep changing. Okay. Right?
Makes sense.
And with things like business coaching and all, it's like a whole lot longer. It can be like minimum of 1 year to 2 years. And then business owners sort of do a hybrid of business and life coaching. So where they will focus on, their business, and then some sessions they'll come back to their personal life. So that can sort of have even a longer, sort of a perpetuity kind of coaching thing. It's just that the longer it goes, usually the topics being discussed would keep on changing. And you'd be at a different phase. So if you are starting at the vision is set. Now maybe like, 1 year down the road, it's deep into execution.
Right.
right? Or the new vision will pop up, right? Maybe they want to start a new business. So maybe that whole process needs to be started for that new business and so on and so forth.
I think coaching and therapy, sometimes it clashes. So when is it appropriate to consult to a coach, and when is it appropriate to consult to a
Right,
therapist?
and people are very confused about this, right?
Yeah.
So one way to think about this is think of like a baseline of whether you are functional or not on a day-to-day basis, right?
Functional? What do you
Functional
mean?
in the sense that it's easy for you to get out of bed, achieve some basic goals and stuff like that. So let's assume somebody has depression. And for them, just getting out of bed and, brushing their teeth is a huge challenge.
Right.
Right? So they sort of become slightly dysfunctional. Right? Coaching has action steps built into it. So typically at the end of a coaching session, I'd sort of ask a person between now and the next session, what action steps can you commit to?
Okay.
Right? And if a person is very dysfunctional, it's unlikely that they will be able to take those action steps. Right? So one of the things can be, if a person is, below that baseline of functionality, is to see a therapist first. Right? What coaching does is coaching works on the present and the future.
Okay.
Right? What an area that coaches do not work is, traumatic past emotions. Right? A coach can go into the past, but it's a resourceful past. Like, think of the last time you felt really confident. Right? So I can sort of tap into your past confidence and bring it to the future goal.
Right.
So if I ever tap into the past is for a resourceful state, like confidence or happiness or something. But I would not tap into a past distressful emotional state. Right? So that's a domain that therapy, if a person needs to explore, like let's say a past traumatic experience, that may be an area that therapy would be useful. Or if we have like, a situation where like, even with a client I'm coaching, I sort of coach them and I realize that over a period of time that they're not unable to take action, then, obviously it's a point of curiosity. Sometimes it can just be execution blocks. Sometimes it can be that probably they're not in the mental state to actually be being coached. They might actually need a therapist to forget goals and all for a while. Just sort of get them back to a more functional level and then sort of work with a coach. So sometimes rehab centers, what they would do is they would have therapists in rehab centers and they would work with a therapist, and the moment they start getting out of that therapy, then they get hand over to a coach.
Okay.
So it becomes functional, but then, just because you become functional doesn't mean you have clarity in terms of what you're going to do next. Right? And we know that if that vision, etc., is not built, you can sort of relapse again. There was a study done, I think, in the 1970s in Russia. A lot of alcoholics. They asked them like, what do you want out of your life in the future? Most of them were unable to articulate a vision. So in that lack of clarity in terms of what you want in your future, gives you that space for a lot of unwanted things and addictions, etc., to creep in. Right. So obviously there is a point where a person can see a therapist, become functional, and start seeing a coach. Sometimes if they are functional and they feel comfortable, they can see both simultaneously.
Okay.
They can just let both people know, like a therapist, that they're seeing a coach and vice versa, and sort of agree that this is a modality that would work for them, assuming they sort of have the time and the energy and the resources to do that kind of work. Otherwise, generally, if people are feeling like, okay, they're more forward and present oriented, I sort of need to go towards where, then that's typically the domain of coaching. Past emotional traumatic state, dysfunctional states, those are usually when it's a good time to see a therapist.
Makes sense.
Right?
We had a wonderful conversation today. Learned a lot. And I think this literally bounded our entire series into one. So thank you so much for
My pleasure.
being
just
here
at
in our
awe
podcast.
and
I think we have a lot to think about as we go home
Wonderful.
after this podcast.
Well, I'm glad it was of some use.
Yeah.
And obviously it's something that, coaching is one, but I would say generally coaching, as a summary, works when the person is really ready to change. And you can't sort of force feed coaching onto someone.
Right.
And that's like one of the ingredients that we have not directly talked about.
Yes.
But coaching generally, because it's work, it's a long-term commitment. When people are genuinely ready to change, it works. I mean, if it's your mom wanting you to get coached, if it's your line manager, then may or may not work. We don't know, right? But the more a person is ready to change, the more it works, right?
So it has to come from within first.
Yeah, I mean,
like you have to be the one seeking for a coach.
Yeah, I mean, that's why. Otherwise, I mean, when we agree on an action steps is where I have doubt it will get done.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're not really wanting to move in that direction, then I mean, you can sort of that whole idea you can bring a horse to the river, but you can't force to drink it, right? Sort of starts to come into play.
Definitely.
Yeah, so thank you so much for being here with us. And we'd like to mention our sponsor, Coffee 8848. They have a very good drip back coffee, so you guys might want to try it out. And we'd also like to thank our venue partner, Villa 72. And thank you, Ravi.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and this is for you.
Okay, great. Thank you so
Even
much.
though you don't drink coffee, we did not know about it. Sorry.
No, I'm on a temporary break. I love coffee.
Oh, then that's good.
That's
it has a shelf life of, I guess, 1 year.
Okay, wonderful.
So whenever you decide to start, please start with.
Definitely. I actually just had ordered a new drip machine also, so that's good. Yeah.
No, but you don't need anything for this.
Okay.
It's like a tea bag for coffee. So
Okay. Oh, is it?
yeah.
Really? Wow.
It has a
Yeah.
built-in drip
Yeah.
bag, so you can just open it up and drip it right.
Yeah, just
Oh, wow.
pour some water and then your coffee's done.
Nice.
Good to go.
Would love to try it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Bye.